you're already here. Come in, we've all been waiting for you.
The house was too quiet when I got home at 2:47 a.m. After 12 hours in the ER, pulling glass shards out of drunk college kids and explaining to worried mothers why little Timmy's fever wasn't the plague, silence should have been golden. Instead, it felt wrong, like finding a pulse where there shouldn't be one. I'm Dr. Rick Callahan, and I've spent the last 15 years learning to trust my instincts. When something feels off in the emergency room, you investigate. When something feels off at home, apparently you're supposed to pretend everything's fine and grab a beer. I should have grabbed that beer. Olivia's purse sat on the kitchen counter, contents spilled like she'd been searching for something in a hurry. Her nursing badge from St. Mary's Hospital lay next to her phone, which was face down and buzzing with notifications. We'd been married 8 years, together for 10, and I'd never seen her leave her phone unattended. Olivia treated that device like a life support machine. The living room looked like a magazine spread too perfect, too staged. The throw pillows were arranged with surgical precision, and her wine glass sat on the coffee table with exactly 2 sips missing. Olivia never left drinks unfinished. She was compulsively neat, a trait that made her an excellent nurse manager and an occasionally exhausting wife. I climbed the stairs, each creak of the old Victorian floorboards announcing my presence. Our bedroom door was closed, which was unusual. Olivia always slept with it open, claiming she needed to hear if someone broke in. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard nothing but the hum of the air conditioning. When I opened the door, the bed was empty but unmade. The sheets were tangled, and Olivia's pillow was on the floor. Her work clothes lay in a heap by the dresser, not folded, not hung up, just dropped. This wasn't the Olivia I knew. This was someone else entirely. The bathroom light was on, and I could hear water running. I knocked softly. "Liv, you okay in there?" "Fine." Her voice was too bright, too cheerful for 3 in the morning. "Just washing my face. Long day. Long day." She'd worked the day shift, which ended at 7 p.m. It was now almost 3 in the morning. Either she'd discovered time travel or she'd been somewhere else for the past 8 hours. I sat on the bed and waited. The water kept running, a steady stream that went on far too long for someone just washing their face. When she finally emerged, her hair was damp, and she was wearing a robe I'd never seen before. Black silk with red trim, expensive looking. "New robe?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She glanced down as if surprised to see what she was wearing. "Oh, this? Jess gave it to me. Said I needed something nice for myself." Jess was her friend from work, a gossip-loving nurse who changed boyfriends like surgical gloves. She was also the type who'd give someone a robe as a gift about as often as she'd volunteer for a double shift on Christmas. "That was thoughtful of her," I said. Olivia nodded and busied herself at the dresser, avoiding eye contact. "How was your shift?" 3 car accidents, 2 overdoses, and a guy who superglued his hand to his forehead on a bet. Just another Tuesday night in paradise. I watched her reflection in the mirror. She was applying lotion with mechanical precision, her movements too controlled. "How was your day?" "Busy. You know how it is." She climbed into bed and turned away from me. "I'm exhausted. Can we talk in the morning?" I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathe. Her rhythm was all wrong, too fast, too shallow. She wasn't asleep, just pretending to be. After 20 minutes, I gave up and went downstairs to that beer I should have grabbed earlier. The kitchen felt different now, charged with questions I wasn't ready to ask. I opened a Corona and sat at the table where we'd eaten breakfast together just that morning. She'd been normal then, complaining about the new trauma surgeon who was making everyone's life difficult, planning our weekend trip to her parents' house, discussing whether we should finally start trying for kids. Her phone buzzed again on the counter. The screen lit up with a text preview. "Can't stop thinking about earlier. You were incredible." The sender was listed as Grant Evers, the new trauma surgeon, the one who'd been making everyone's life difficult. I stared at that phone for a long time, Corona growing warm in my hand. I could wake her up, demand an explanation, start a fight that would probably end our marriage. Or I could pretend I hadn't seen anything and spend the rest of my life wondering. Or I could do what any good doctor does when presented with symptoms: investigate thoroughly before making a diagnosis. I picked up her phone. The lock screen showed 12 missed messages, all from Grant E. The previews were enough to paint a picture I didn't want to see. "Your husband doesn't deserve you. Meet me tomorrow at the usual place. I love the way you taste." My hands were shaking. In the ER, I could perform surgery on a car accident sufferer without breaking a sweat, but reading my wife's Zex had me trembling like a first-year medical student. I needed to see more. I needed to see everything. The phone was locked with Face ID, but I knew Olivia's passcode, our wedding anniversary. She'd never changed it, claiming she had nothing to hide. Apparently, she'd been wrong about that. I climbed the stairs again, phone in hand. She was still pretending to sleep, still breathing too fast. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the phone up to her face. The screen unlocked instantly. What I found made me wish I'd stuck with the beer and denial. The text thread with Grant went back 3 months. 3 months of my wife describing in explicit detail what she wanted to do to another man. 3 months of planning secret meetings, sharing photos I'd never seen her take, and discussing how Rick is so clueless, he'll never figure it out. She was right about that. I'd been completely clueless. But the texts were nothing compared to the photos. Olivia had always been conservative about pictures, claiming she didn't want anything floating around the internet. Apparently, she just didn't want them floating around to me. The folder labeled G contained 47 photos and 16 videos, all featuring my wife in positions and locations I didn't recognize. The most recent video was time-stamped at 11:23 p.m., less than 4 hours ago. In it, Olivia was in our bed, wearing the black silk robe, talking to someone off camera. "He'll be home soon," she was saying. "We need to clean up." A male voice responded, "Let him find out. I'm tired of sneaking around." "Not yet, Grant. I need more time to figure out the finances." Finances? She wasn't just cheating. She was planning her exit strategy. I watched the entire video, taking screenshots of the most damning moments. Then I copied everything to my own phone and put hers back on the nightstand. She never stirred, but her breathing had finally slowed to a normal rhythm. Apparently, guilt was exhausting. I went back downstairs and spent the rest of the night going through the evidence. By the time the sun came up, I had a complete picture of my wife's double life. The affair had started at a hospital conference in Chicago. Grant had pursued her aggressively, sending flowers to her office and expensive gifts to our house. Gifts she'd claimed were from grateful patients. The usual place mentioned in the text was Grant's waterfront condo, a pretentious glass tower where he'd been taking her twice a week for the past 2 months. They'd even used our bed when I was working overnight shifts, which explained why I'd been finding blonde hairs on my pillow. Olivia was brunette, but apparently Grant had a type. The worst part wasn't the Zex or the lies. It was reading how little she thought of me. According to her texts, I was boring, predictable, and more interested in his patients than his wife. Grant was exciting, dangerous, and everything Rick isn't. She wasn't wrong about that last part. I wasn't exciting or dangerous. I was a steady, reliable ER doctor who came home every night, paid the bills on time, and thought our biggest problem was deciding what to watch on Netflix. But I was about to become very interesting. At 7 a.m., Olivia came downstairs dressed for work, acting like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek and poured coffee into her travel mug, chattering about her day like she hadn't spent the previous evening in bed with another man. "Don't forget we're having dinner with my parents Friday," she said, checking her appearance in the hallway mirror. "Mom specifically requested you make that pasta salad she likes." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, wondering if Grant would be joining us. She left at 7:30, and I immediately called in sick to the hospital. I needed time to plan, and I needed allies. The first person I called was Carla Martinez, the bartender at Murphy's Pub, a dive bar 3 blocks from St. Mary's, where most of the hospital staff went to decompress after difficult shifts. Carla had been pouring drinks and collecting secrets for 15 years. If you wanted to know who was sleeping with whom, who was stealing supplies, or which doctor had a gambling problem, Carla was your source. She also had a soft spot for me, because I'd treated her son in the ER after a motorcycle accident, staying late to make sure he got the best care possible. "Rick," she answered on the second ring. "Please tell me you're calling to say you're coming in early today. I've got gossip that'll curl your toes." "Actually, I think I might be the gossip today," I said. "Can we meet somewhere private? I need advice." An hour later, I was sitting in Carla's kitchen showing her the screenshots while she made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Her apartment was above the bar, decorated with photos of her family and memorabilia from her 20 years in the Navy. Carla didn't judge, didn't lecture, and didn't sugarcoat the truth. "Well, crap," she said after reviewing the evidence. "Your wife's been busy. Tell me something I don't know. Grant Evers is a piece of work. Came into the bar last week bragging about his new project. Said he was working on something that would really shake up the hospital. She refilled my coffee cup. Guess we know what he meant. What else do you know about him? Divorced twice, both times because he couldn't keep it in his pants. Drives a BMW like he's compensating for something. Lives in that glass tower on Harbor Street and thinks he's God's gift to medicine. She leaned back in her chair. Word is he's been sniffing around several of the nurses, but Olivia's the only one who bit. Lucky me. Here's the thing, Rick. You could confront them, file for divorce, and walk away. You'd probably get a decent settlement, especially with this evidence. She gestured at the phone. Or, you could make them pay for humiliating you. Really pay. Her smile was sharp as a scalpel. I've seen what happens to people who cross you in the ER. You don't get angry. You get surgical. Maybe it's time to operate. She was right. In the emergency room, I was known for staying calm under pressure and finding creative solutions to impossible problems. A patient comes in with a bizarre injury. I figure out how to fix it. A drunk gets violent with the staff. I find a way to neutralize the threat without anyone getting hurt. Olivia and Grant had created a problem. Time to find a solution. What did you have in mind? I asked. Carla's grin widened. First, we gather intelligence. I'll put out feelers at the bar, see what people are saying. You need to know exactly who knows about this affair and who's helping them cover it up. And then we introduce them to the concept of consequences. But we do it smart, legal, and absolutely devastating. She raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. Welcome to the revenge business, Dr. Callahan. Let's make some house calls. The next few days were educational. I went to work, treated patients, and acted like everything was normal while quietly building a case against my wife and her lover. Carla proved invaluable, using her network of hospital staff to gather information I never could have accessed on my own. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. Grant hadn't just targeted Olivia. He'd been systematically working his way through the hospital's female staff since arriving 6 months ago. He'd already had affairs with 2 other nurses, a radiologist and a pharmacy tech. His pattern was consistent: charm them with expensive gifts, promise them a future, then move on to the next conquest once he got bored. What made Olivia different was that she'd fallen hard. According to Jess, who'd been feeding information to Carla in exchange for free drinks, Olivia was convinced Grant was going to leave his girlfriend and marry her. She'd even started looking at apartments, planning for a life after our divorce. His girlfriend. That was news to me. Turns out Grant was living with a pharmaceutical sales rep named Monica. A blonde who looked exactly like Olivia's photos suggested she was trying to look. Monica had no idea about the affairs, but she was the one funding Grant's lifestyle. Her family money paid for the condo, the BMW, and the expensive restaurants where he'd been taking my wife. The web of deception was impressive in its complexity and disgusting in its callousness. Grant was using Monica's money to seduce other women, while promising each of them a future he had no intention of providing. He wasn't just a cheater, he was a con artist. But the most valuable intelligence came from an unexpected source. Manny Rodriguez, the night janitor at St. Mary's. Manny was a 60-year-old former Marine who'd worked at the hospital for 20 years. Everyone ignored him, which meant he saw and heard everything. I found him Thursday night, cleaning the ER break room while I finished my shift paperwork. "Dr. Callahan," he said, looking up from mopping. "You okay? You seem different lately." Manny had always been perceptive. During his Marine years, he'd been military police, trained to read people and situations. Nothing got past him. "Just some personal stuff," I said. "Nothing I can't handle." He nodded and continued mopping, but I could tell he had something to say. After a few minutes, he spoke again. I clean Dr. Evers's office every night. Man leaves his computer unlocked, papers everywhere. Not very careful about his privacy. I looked up from my charts. Is that so? Last week, I accidentally knocked over his trash can. Papers went everywhere. Had to pick them all up, of course. He paused his mopping. Some interesting reading in that trash. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, pharmacy prescriptions for things that ain't exactly medical. What kind of things? Manny glanced around to make sure we were alone. Viagra, lots of it. More than any one man should need, if you catch my meaning. I caught his meaning. Grant was medicating himself to keep up with multiple partners. There was other stuff, too. Credit card statements, bank records. Man's got expensive tastes and not much money to support them. living way beyond his means. This was getting interesting. How far beyond? Let's just say if his sugar mama found out how much debt he's carrying, she might reconsider the relationship. Manny resumed mopping. Of course, that's none of my business. I just clean up the messes. Of course. But if someone wanted to know more about those messes, I do my rounds at the same time every night, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Amazing what people leave lying around when they think nobody's watching. Message received. Manny was offering to be my inside source, and he was doing it because he'd figured out what was happening. The man missed nothing. I appreciate the information, Manny. Just looking out for the good guys, Doc. You've always treated me with respect, never acted like I was invisible. That means something. He moved his mop bucket toward the door. Some people in this hospital think they're untouchable. Maybe it's time they learn different. Friday arrived, and with it, dinner at Olivia's parents' house. I made the requested pasta salad and practiced my poker face in the bathroom mirror. Tonight would be a performance, and I needed to be convincing. The Hendersons lived in a McMansion in the suburbs, all marble countertops and crystal chandeliers. They'd never liked me, considering their daughter had married beneath her station. Richard Henderson was a retired bank president who still wore three-piece suits to casual dinners. Patricia Henderson was a former debutante who collected charity board positions like some people collected stamps. They tolerated me because I was a doctor, but they'd never let me forget that emergency medicine wasn't real medicine like cardiology or neurosurgery. If they knew their daughter was cheating with a trauma surgeon, they'd probably throw a party. Rick. Patricia air-kissed my cheek. You look tired, dear. Are you eating enough vegetables? Just been working a lot of nights, I said, handing over the pasta salad. You know how it is. Richard clapped me on the shoulder with false heartiness. That's the spirit. Hard work builds character. Though I do hope you're planning for the future. Emergency medicine is a young man's game. Olivia shot him a warning look. Dad, please, Rick loves his job. Of course. Just thinking about grandchildren, that's all. Patricia and I aren't getting any younger. Grandchildren. I wondered if they'd still want them if they knew their potential grandchild might not be mine. According to the texts I'd read, Olivia and Grant hadn't been using protection. Dinner was the usual performance of stilted conversation and passive-aggressive comments. Richard dominated the discussion with stories about his banking days, while Patricia critiqued everything from the wine selection to Olivia's hair. I smiled, nodded, and waited for my moment. It came during dessert, when Patricia was showing off her new iPad and bragging about how connected she was to social media. I just love Facebook, she gushed. I can keep up with everyone's lives. Did you know the Johnson's daughter is getting divorced? I saw the most dramatic post about it. Social media can be dangerous, I said carefully. People share things they probably shouldn't. It's amazing what you can learn about someone just from their online activity. Olivia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? Oh, cheating spouses getting caught. People losing jobs over inappropriate posts. Once something's online, it's permanent. I took a sip of wine. I always tell people to be careful what they put in writing. You never know who might see it. The color drained from Olivia's face, but her parents didn't notice. They were too busy agreeing with me about the dangers of social media oversharing. Exactly, Richard said. People have no sense of privacy anymore. In my day, if you wanted to have an affair, you at least had the decency to be discreet about it. Patricia gasped. Richard. What? I'm not saying it's right, just that people used to have more class. He looked at me. Don't you agree, Rick? Absolutely, I said, making eye contact with Olivia. Cheating is bad enough, but flaunting it publicly shows a real lack of character. The kind of person who would do that probably doesn't deserve the life they're trying to destroy. Olivia excused herself to use the bathroom and didn't return for 20 minutes. When she finally came back, her eyes were red and she claimed she was getting a migraine. We left early. The drive home was silent until we were almost to our street. What was that about? Olivia asked. What about? All that talk about social media and cheating. You were trying to make some kind of point. I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. Just making conversation. Why? Did it hit a little close to home? She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning. She was trying to figure out how much I knew, if anything. Finally, she shook her head. You're being paranoid. I think you need to take some time off work. The stress is getting to you. Maybe you're right, I said. Maybe I should start paying more attention to what's happening in my own life instead of focusing so much on work. That night, she took a sleeping pill and was unconscious by 10 p.m. I waited until midnight, then drove to the hospital to meet Manny for the intelligence gathering session he'd arranged. Manny was waiting for me in the parking garage, smoking a cigarette and looking like he'd done this kind of thing before, which, given his military police background, he probably had. "Right on time," he said, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under his heel. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be." He led me through a service entrance I'd never noticed before, using his keycard to bypass the main security checkpoints. The hospital at midnight was a different world. Dimly lit corridors, skeleton staff, and an almost supernatural quiet, broken only by the distant sounds of medical equipment. "Grant's office is on the 3rd floor," Manny whispered as we climbed the back stairwell. "He usually leaves around 8, but sometimes comes back late to use the computer. We'll have about an hour before I need to start cleaning that wing." The administrative offices were dark and empty. Manny used his master key to let us into Grant's office, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Everything was arranged to impress medical degrees in expensive frames, awards from pharmaceutical companies, photos of Grant with various hospital bigwigs. "Computer's password protected, but he writes everything down," Manny said, pointing to a leather-bound notebook beside the keyboard. "Man's got no concept of security." I flipped through the notebook while Manny kept watch at the door. Grant had indeed written down everything: passwords, account numbers, even personal notes about his various conquests. There was a whole section devoted to O, with detailed observations about my wife's preferences, schedule, and emotional vulnerabilities. "She's desperate for excitement," one entry read. "Bored with her safe, predictable life. Easy to manipulate if you make her feel special." Another entry dated just last week. "Getting clingy. Talking about leaving husband. Need to slow this down before she gets ideas." So much for true love. But the real treasure was in his desk drawers. Grant kept meticulous financial records, probably a holdover from his 2 expensive divorces. What they revealed was a man living completely beyond his means, juggling credit card debt, overdue loans, and a lifestyle funded entirely by his girlfriend Monica's family money. He owed $40,000 to various creditors, had been turned down for 3 different loans, and was apparently being investigated by the state medical board for some unspecified ethical violation. The Golden Boy image was pure fiction. "Look at this," Manny whispered, pulling a folder from the filing cabinet. "Insurance fraud." The folder contained copies of false medical reports Grant had filed for several patients, inflating the severity of their conditions to justify higher billing rates. It was exactly the kind of thing that could end a medical career and result in criminal charges. "He's been doing this for months," I said, photographing each document with my phone. "How has nobody caught him?" "Who's going to check up on the hotshot trauma surgeon? Man's got everyone convinced he's the second coming." Manny closed the filing cabinet. "But this stuff will bury him if it gets to the right people." I spent another 30 minutes copying everything I could find: financial records, personal notes, medical files, and a particularly damaging folder labeled Insurance Issues that contained correspondence with lawyers about his previous fraud investigations. The picture that emerged was of a man completely out of control, using charm and manipulation to hide a pattern of unethical and illegal behavior. He wasn't just cheating on his girlfriend and seducing married women, he was stealing from patients, defrauding insurance companies, and apparently had a serious gambling problem based on the casino receipts I found. "We should go," Manny said, checking his watch. "Security does a round at 1:30. We locked up and made our way back to the parking garage without incident. As we reached our cars, Manny handed me a flash drive. "What's this?" "Security footage from the past 3 months. Turns out the cameras in the parking garage have a perfect view of Grant's car. Amazing how many times your wife shows up on those recordings." He grinned. "Funny thing about being a janitor, nobody pays attention to you, but you have access to everything." I stared at the flash drive. "Manny, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is just intelligence gathering. What you do with it is up to you." He opened his car door, then paused. "But if you decide to take action, you didn't get any of this from me." "Understood. And Rick, whatever you're planning, make sure it's legal. Revenge is sweet, but prison food sucks." I drove home with a car full of evidence and a head full of possibilities. Olivia was still unconscious, aided by her sleeping pill and probably guilt-induced exhaustion. I spent the rest of the night organizing everything I'd collected, building a comprehensive file on both my wife's affair and Grant's criminal activities. By dawn, I had enough evidence to destroy both of their lives several times over. The question was how to use it most effectively. The answer came to me as I was making coffee and watching Olivia stumble downstairs in her robe. The expensive black one that had started this whole investigation. She looked terrible, like someone who hadn't been sleeping well despite pharmaceutical assistance. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were bloodshot, and she moved like every joint ached. "Morning," she mumbled, reaching for the coffee pot. "Sleep okay?" "Not really. I think I'm getting sick." She poured coffee with shaking hands. "Maybe I should call in today." Perfect. If she was staying home, she wouldn't be able to meet Grant for their usual Friday afternoon rendezvous. According to the texts I'd been monitoring, they had plans to christen his new office couch. "That's probably a good idea," I said. "You should rest." She nodded gratefully and shuffled back upstairs. Within minutes, I heard her on the phone, presumably calling in sick. Then I heard her make another call. "Grant, it's me. I can't make it today. I know, I'm disappointed too. Rick's acting strange. I think he might suspect something. No, I don't think he knows for sure, but we need to be more careful." Time to change that equation. If they wanted to be careful, I'd give them something to really worry about. I called Carla and asked her to meet me at the bar. It was time to move from intelligence gathering to active measures. Murphy's Pub at 10 a.m. on a Saturday was exactly what you'd expect, dim, empty, and smelling like last night's regrets. Carla was behind the bar doing inventory and looking like she'd been up all night, which she probably had. "You look like hell," she said by way of greeting. "Feel worse, but I've got everything we need to move forward." I slid into a bar stool and laid my phone on the bar. "Want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes?" For the next hour, I walked her through everything I'd discovered. The affair, the fraud, the financial problems, the other women. It was a soap opera written by someone with a particularly twisted imagination. Jesus Christ, Rick. This guy's not just a cheater, he's a full-blown sociopath. Carla poured herself a shot of whiskey despite the early hour. "And your wife's either incredibly naive or incredibly stupid." "Both, I think. She actually believes he's going to leave Monica for her." "Monica's the girlfriend with the money?" "Right. Pharmaceutical heiress who's been funding his lifestyle while he screws half the hospital staff." I showed her the financial records. "Without her, he'd be bankrupt in about 6 weeks. Carla studied the documents, her bartender's brain already working on the angles. So if Monica found out about the affairs, Grant would lose his sugar mama, his fancy condo, and probably his job when the financial pressure forced him to make mistakes. And if the hospital administration found out about the insurance fraud, he'd lose his medical license and probably face criminal charges. And if your wife's parents found out about the affair, they'd disown her. They're old-fashioned Catholics who barely tolerated her marrying beneath their social class. Infidelity would be unforgivable." Carla grinned and downed her shot. "I love it when a plan comes together. So what's the strategy?" "Multi-pronged attack. We hit them from different directions simultaneously so they can't coordinate a defense." I pulled up the security footage on my phone. First, we exposed the affair to the people who matter most to each of them. Monica and the parents. Right. But we do it in a way that maximizes the damage and minimizes the chance they can explain it away. How? I showed her the most damaging video from Olivia's phone, the one where she was in our bed, discussing how clueless I was while Grant laughed in the background. "We send this to Monica anonymously, along with the financial records showing how Grant's been spending her money on other women. We include hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even the Viagra prescriptions. Brutal. I like it. At the same time, we send edited versions to Olivia's parents, focusing on the betrayal and disrespect. We include screenshots of her texts about how boring and predictable I am. Double brutal. What about the hospital? That's where it gets interesting. We don't report the fraud directly. Instead, we create a situation where the hospital has to investigate Grant for other reasons, and they discover the fraud themselves." Carla raised an eyebrow. "How?" "Sexual maltreatment complaints. We have evidence that Grant has been pursuing multiple female employees using his position to pressure them into relationships. That's grounds for immediate investigation. But the women would have to file complaints. Some of them will once they realize they weren't special, that he was running the same game on all of them." I pulled up another folder on my phone. "I've got text threads between Grant and 3 other women, all containing identical promises and lies. When they see this evidence, they'll be angry enough to go to HR. And during the investigation, The hospital will audit his cases, review his files, and discover the insurance fraud. They'll have no choice but to fire him and report him to the authorities. Carla was quiet for a moment, processing the plan. Finally, she nodded. It's elegant, completely legal, totally devastating, and almost impossible to trace back to you. She refilled her shot glass. When do we start? Today. I want everything to hit simultaneously so they can't warn each other or coordinate damage control. What do you need from me? Access to the other women Grant's been manipulating. You said some of them come in here? Sarah from radiology comes in every Thursday. Lisa from pharmacy is here most weekends. And there's a nurse named Amy who's been crying into her beer for the past month, talking about some doctor who promised her the world and then ghosted her. Perfect. Can you arrange for them to be here tonight, together? Leave it to me. I'll tell them I'm hosting a girls' night for hospital staff. Free drinks and a safe space to vent about work drama. And I'll provide the entertainment. I spent the rest of the day preparing the evidence packages. For Monica, I created a comprehensive dossier showing Grant's financial dependence on her, his pattern of affairs, and his plans to string her along indefinitely while pursuing other women. The evidence was damning and impossible to explain away. For Olivia's parents, I focused on the betrayal and disrespect, including screenshots of texts where she mocked their traditional values and laughed about deceiving them. I knew it would hurt them, but they deserved to know who their daughter really was. The package for the hospital women was more subtle, just enough evidence to show them they weren't special, that Grant had used identical tactics on all of them. I let their anger and humiliation do the rest. At 8 p.m., I walked into Murphy's pub carrying a laptop and a folder full of printouts. Carla had done her job perfectly. Sarah, Lisa, and Amy were sitting at a corner table, drinks in hand, commiserating about their various work frustrations. Ladies, I said, approaching their table, I'm Dr. Rick Callahan from the ER. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance who's been causing problems for all of us. Amy looked up, her eyes already red from crying. Who? Dr. Grant Evers, and I think it's time you knew the truth about him. I opened the laptop and showed them everything. The identical text messages he'd sent to each of them, the promises he'd made to multiple women simultaneously, the evidence that they were just names on a list, conquests to be collected and discarded. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. That fool! Sarah slammed her drink down so hard it sloshed onto the table. He told me I was the only one who understood him. He said the same thing to me, Lisa said, her voice shaking with rage. And he borrowed $2,000 last month, said he was having a temporary cash flow problem. Amy was staring at the screen in shock. These are the exact same words he used with me, word for word. Because it's a script, I said gently. You're all intelligent, accomplished women, and he targeted you specifically because he knew you'd be valuable to him professionally and personally. What do you mean? Sarah asked. I showed them the financial records. He's been using relationships with hospital staff to get inside information about cases, schedules, and opportunities, plus borrowing money, getting favors, and building a network of people who would cover for him. Cover for him how? Lisa leaned forward. Insurance fraud, falsified medical reports, billing irregularities. I let that sink in. Some of you have access to systems he needed to manipulate. Others provided alibis for his activities. He's been using all of you. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Amy spoke up. What can we do about it? File complaints with HR. Report the maltreatment, the manipulation, the financial exploitation. Force the hospital to investigate him properly. Will you back us up? Sarah asked. I'll provide whatever evidence you need. But it has to come from you. You're the sufferers here. They looked at each other, and I could see the moment they made their decision. Hell hath no fury like multiple women scorned simultaneously. Let's burn this fool down, Amy said.